Good day. I am Mithi Aquino from BSIT 1242, and today I will talk about debt to GDP ratio. Since the refocusing of the World Bank from reconstruction to development, the World Bank has been an enormous help in helping countries develop by allowing countries to loan from the bank to boost their economy. Needless to say, loans do come with drawbacks, being if it is not observed properly, the country may suddenly be buried with an insufferable amount of debt that may hinder the country's progress. Thus, in order to keep the loans in check, debt to GDP ratio is one of the things a country considers before taking a loan. But what is debt to GDP ratio? Debt to GDP ratio is the ratio between a country's government debt and its GDP or gross domestic product, or in other words, debt to GDP ratio is the formula that compares a country's total debt to its economy productivity. But what is GDP exactly? GDP is the measure of the total value of all goods and services in a country. This includes some non-market production such as defense or education services provided by the government, which makes it an important instrument to measure the overall health of a country's economy. So, how can we measure GDP? Well, GDP is defined by the formula GDP is equals to consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. In simple terms, GDP is the income produced by the government each year. On the other hand, to get the debt to GDP ratio, we divide a nation's debt by its gross domestic product. Now, why is debt to GDP ratio important? It is important because it measures the financial leverage of an economy, and the measurement of the financial leverage of an economy is a necessary step in order to determine how much debt a country can sustain in order to not resort to hard or soft default and bailout or loan forgiveness that can cause adverse effects on the political scene, such as political turmoils, and markets such as inflations. In addition, as said earlier, GDP is the income produced by the government each year. Therefore, in taking a loan, it is important that a country must consider the GDP to debt ratio before taking a debt, since it gives the management an idea on how long they will have to cut their current finances in order to pay their debts, since debt practically means that the country will pay for its investments on a later date. Now, what is considered as the optimal GDP to debt ratio? In 2015, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, calculated that there is a positive but limited optimal growth maximizing government debt level at 50 to 80% of GDP, which is made on the assumption that debt is used exclusively to finance net investment. The primary reason that they come to this conclusion was because they think that if the debts are put into investment, the gains from the investment will be far larger than the debts taken by the country. Therefore, in this process, the debt results to a surplus value, which will help the country increase its GDP, thereby fulfilling the purpose of World Bank, which is to help poor countries to develop. In conclusion, the optimal debt to GDP ratio is at 50 to 80% because it utilizes the investment into the biggest growth spurt the country can earn in a certain period of time. Anything lower than 50% means that the country isn't utilizing their debt resource in order to progress further.